everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of H Can Hack, the show where I take you with me on my quest for handmade, not homemade. As I've mentioned in my intro video, my initial concept was to do a sewing YouTube channel, and this show has been something I've dreamed about for the past 2 years. So it is with immense pleasure that I am finally making it a reality. This is the Style Arc Sally Jean skirt pattern, which I'll be hacking into shorts. So I chose Style Arc because it's got a ready-to-wear aesthetic, and it shows in this pattern where it's got a real fly, belt loops, and decorative back pockets. These are the pieces I've cut out in advance. There are 2 back pockets, 2 front pocket facings, 2 pocket bags, a coin pocket, 5 belt loops, a fly facing, and a fly bearer. My tracing wheel and dressmaker's carbon don't show up well on the denim, so I am tracing the pieces that are more critical to the design onto cardstock. For example, this piece is the waistband. For the back yoke, I added 3/8 inches more seam allowance so that I can flat fell the seams. To make the front piece into shorts, I overlay a pair of pants with the fit that I want so that the center front of the pattern aligns with the fly and the top of the pattern with the waistband. To make sure that the fly and pockets will still line up, I lay them over the pants before tracing. I then trace the crotch and inseam along the pant seam and smooth it out with a French curve. Because these are shorts, I used a pair of shorts that fit to check and adjust the inseam length. I want these to be mid-length shorts with a turn-up, so I added 2 inches for folding over and 2 inches of hem allowance. Because the back piece has a yoke, I have to trace it on before I can line up the back piece of the pants with the pattern. I folded the pants the other way to have the back crotch seam at the edge and traced it out in the same way as the front. These are the 2 pieces that I've cut out of cardstock, the front and the back. I'm also lining this up against a pair of shorts that fit, and you can see that the side seam is really wide. Part of that is because of the additional seam allowance, but also because the original pattern is a skirt. So what I'm going to do is leave it, because I think when you improvise, it's always better to have more fabric rather than less. But I will take a look at it again when it's time to sew the side seams and take it in if needed. I am now tracing all the pieces that I cut out from the cardstock onto the fabric using tailor's chalk. The line is nice and visible, but I had to trace over some areas to get closer to the edge, so I must remember to cut on the inside of the line, especially when it is thicker. I've seen pros do it the same way, except that they use oak tack, which is expensive, so I substituted that with Vanguard sheets from the stationery shop. I used a long ruler to align the grain line to the fabric and had to dig out all my tracing paper patterns to trace the grain line on both sides of the cardstock pieces so that I have them for reference when I trace out the other side. To get a steady cut, I make sure my scissors are touching the floor at all times and cut in as long strokes as possible. These are the waistband pieces. Style Arc has chosen to draft them as a single piece instead of having side seams. I turned the cardstock over to cut the second piece because even though it looks symmetrical, I don't want to assume that it automatically is. So now we have cut out all the pieces and we are ready to start sewing. Here I am at my pressing station. The tops of the 3 patch pockets are exposed, so the raw edges must be completely enclosed to keep the fabric from fraying. After double folding and ironing down the edges, I top stitched them twice with a 3mm straight stitch. Next, I bring the 3 pocket pieces and the 2 front pocket facings back to the ironing station, turn the edges in by 3/8 inch and press them down. I thought about serging them to prevent fraying, but on ready-to-wear jeans, they usually are just pressed in. I think that's because the serging can make the edges bulky and therefore difficult to fold in at the corners. In any case, they will be top stitched twice, so that will protect the seam allowance and the edges. Pressing in the edges of the pocket facings can be a bit tricky because of the curves. I try to make sure the curves lie as smooth gathers instead of bulky folds. Before attaching the coin pocket, I need to sew the two pocket facings onto the pocket back pieces. This is just a single row of top stitching. To position the coin pocket, I align the bottom curve with the curve of the right hand side pocket facing. For the back pockets, I mark out the crotch seam and yoke seam allowances, which are both 3/4 inch, and then mark an attachment point 1 inch away from the crotch seam and 1 inch away from the yoke seam. I then position the top edge of the pocket to run parallel to the yoke seam. I attach the 3 patch pockets by using my left needle position to sew one row of top stitching near the edge, then adjusting to my center needle position and aligning my presser foot to the first row of edge stitching. The tricky part is judging where to pivot my needle, as the back pockets are visible to the public, so I cannot overshoot and then backtrack. The patch pockets are now complete. Next, I need to close up the base and sides of the pocket bags. I have changed over to normal thread instead of top stitching thread for this step because it matches my pocket fabric better. Actually, I made a mistake on the first pocket. In order for the shorts fronts to attach correctly to the pocket edges, I need to leave the seam allowance open, and so I unpicked it. Because the pocket edges are exposed on the inside of the shorts and will get a good deal of wear and tear, I finished the bottom edge with my serger, also known as an overlocker. To attach the pocket bags to the shorts front, I line up the two pieces right sides together and sew them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is a tricky curve because it is quite tight. I need to clip the curve carefully for it to lie flat when turned inside out, and because the denim is thick, I need to use my fabric shears instead of the small scissors to do the job. After turning the seam, I press it flat and top stitch it. The finished shorts front looks like this. Alright, now I've finished doing the pockets and I'm ready to start constructing the denim shorts. One of the things I've emphasized a lot is about flat fell seams, and there's a reason for it. It's one of the steps that nowadays not everyone who makes jeans bothers to do, but it is more lasting and therefore is considered a hallmark of well-constructed jeans. This pair is from Uniqlo. It's one of my favorite bootcut jeans and they don't make them like this anymore. So, here you see that on the back crotch it's been flat felled, and here with the yoke it's also got flat fells. So how you tell that it's a flat fell is that you don't have any raw edges and everything's nicely folded over each other like this. Moving on to the front. From the fly to the front rise, there is a serged and top stitched seam, and then the inseam is serged and top stitched as well, and the out seam is what they call busted. This second pair is from Free People and it's very similar. It's got flat fell seams all in the back, and then it's got similarly a serged and top stitched front rise, and then the inseam however is flat fell and you have a busted outer seam. This pair I'm not sure what the brand is. BCBG, yes, this is from BCBG. I bought these from Isetan and they've been with me for more than 10 years. So the back is flat felled, as you can see, and the front, same thing. The inseam is not felt in this pair. So they've been serged and then there is some top stitching, and similarly the out seam is not busted but just serged as well. The final pair, honestly, I'm a little disappointed. Everything is just serged together, so there's no flat felling whatsoever in this pair. So I'm going to go ahead and do some flat felling of my own. Here I'm flat felling the yokes to the back pieces. I start with sewing the two pieces wrong sides together so you see the seam allowances on the right side.
Then I press the seam allowance flat. I want the top seam allowance to fold over the bottom one so that the fold points downwards. So first of all, I press the lower back piece seam allowance upwards so that I can mark 3/8 inch and cut off the excess fabric. Next, I fold the yoke seam allowance, which is 3/4 inch and now twice the width of the lower back piece seam allowance, downwards and over to enclose the other raw edge. This means we have 4 layers of denim fabric. The lower back piece itself, 2 layers of folded seam allowance from the yoke, and the enclosed seam allowance from the lower back piece. I top stitch along the folded edge to anchor down the fold, and that's it. I have a flat felt seam with no raw edges showing. Finally, I repeat the process with the back rise seam. The tricky aspect of this is keeping the curved part flat when I press and top stitch it down. I tried using bar tacks to reinforce the corners of the pockets, but my machine got stuck because the fabric is thick and uneven. So instead, I top stitched the square with 2 diagonal lines in it at the top corner of each pocket to strengthen it. Now that I've completed the back part of the shorts, it's time to move on to the front fly. Honestly, this part of the video was really hard to record and edit because of all the mistakes that I made. This is not my first time making a fly, it's my 4th time overall and the 2nd time that I'm trying to do it without any pattern instructions. Still, the denim fabric is quite thick, and so that was why things didn't lie flat and I had to figure out how to fix it. That being said, I would like to take you on my journey of my mistakes, how I fixed them, and hopefully to give some inspiration that you can fail and pick yourself up again. A fly has 3 parts: a fly barrel on the inside, the zip itself, and a fly facing. The fly barrel has a serged edge on the side, and the bottom is sewn right sides together and turned. You also have to serge the edge of the facing and sew right sides together to your zip. I sewed the fly barrel and turned it inside out. Then I serged the long edge of the fly barrel, which is exposed on the inside of the shorts. For the fly facing, I had to serge both the curved and the long straight edges. Sewing the fly facing was quite straightforward. I attached it to the shorts front, right sides together. I can then flip the pieces inside out like this, so the right side of the facing faces the zip. I will later sew the zip to the facing like this. Here's how I lined up the zip to the facing. When sewing the zip on, I faced difficulties because my presser foot couldn't lift high enough for me to push the bulky zipper pull past it. I tried many times, then finally gave up and sewed the seam in 2 parts. My first major mistake was to shorten the zip. I thought my needle might break sewing over it, so I cut off the end with much effort. I then tacked the fly barrier in place to sew. Next, I top stitch both sides of the zip. This is the next place where I really got into trouble. I tried using my hand to measure where the edge of the facing was and drawing a line on the right side to guide my top stitching. It was super easy to top stitch 2 rows following the line, about 5 mm apart. However, this method didn't catch all of the curve, so I re-sewed it from the wrong side, following the facing edge itself. This took care of the facing edge, but there was a gap below the zip because it was too short. So I had to re-anchor the base of the zip between the facing and fly barrier by top stitching again. I then tried to sew the crotch seam, but could never get the part that meets the base of the fly to lie flat. Here is the final result. I finally managed to do it off camera when I stopped to think and ended up snipping the seam allowance below the fly so it wouldn't bunch up. Woohoo! I am so relieved to be doing something easier again. Here, I'm marking out the seam allowance for the inseam. This is another flat fell seam. The one challenging part is to keep everything flat at the crotch curve. That's the main challenge with sewing clothes. The human body is 3D with many curves, but it's so much easier to sew seams on a flat surface. So I have to break down the curve into many little flat bits and go slowly. At the crotch, I crossed the inseam with another flat fell, so I have 8 layers of denim to walk my machine through. But I succeeded with a size 90 needle, which was a surprise as I had broken a number of those needles the first time I sewed this pattern as a skirt. Here I'm trying on the shorts with the seam allowance marked with pins. It fits well as is, so I won't redraw the side seams. I then faced the shorts right sides together and sewed the side seams. To make the sides look like a ribbon trim when turned up, I finished the raw edges with bias binding. Before I started sewing the side seams, I did a sanity check to make sure the waistband fit. There was 3/4 inch left over, so that was correct since the seam allowance on the waistband pieces is 3/8 inch. My belt loop pieces are too narrow to fold both raw edges in, so I looked at my Uniqlo jeans to see how they made them. The edges are cover stitched. They look serged on the underside with 2 rows of top stitching on the upper side. I don't have a cover stitch machine, so I serged one edge and folded the loop into 3 widthwise with the serged edge on the outside. I then top stitched 2 rows on either edge to close up the belt loops. To attach the outer waistband, I pinned it all around the shorts, then inserted the belt loops. The 5 belt loop positions are next to the 2 front pockets, at the center back, and at the 2 side seams. Next, I sewed the waistband to the shorts, reverse stitching twice at the belt loops to reinforce them. Before sewing on the inner waistband, I reinforced it with interfacing. Because the shape of this piece is rather wasteful of material, I pieced together several scraps of interfacing instead of cutting from a bigger piece. Then, I pinned the inner waistband right sides together and sew it on like this. Because I sandwiched the belt loops in the waistband, I can't top stitch it with my machine, so I slip stitched the lower edge of the inner waistband to the shorts by hand. It took me about 90 minutes to finish the waistband. Adding the button and buttonhole was actually the most stressful part of this project because any mistakes cannot be undone. These are the final shots. See you next time.